question, but please bear with me. Amabhungane and daily maverick, they are also having powers to investigate people quietly. For the laws of South Africa, is that being allowed? Because we always hear about them saying that they've been investigating so and so, just to check, just to have knowledge. And sometimes they come up with not the real information, but yeah, we've seen that.
Okay.
Because we're in the workshop, I just want knowledge.
No problem. Amabhungane are an investigative media house, so they would not cover, say, sitting or opening a legislature, for example. They do focus on the things that most newsrooms actually do not have the time and the resources for, which is investigations that could take anything from 3 months, sometimes 6 months, and sometimes even a year, depending on what is the story. From my understanding, and as a disclaimer, this is not to dismiss anyone's experience of engaging with them, but they would come to abantu who have been, or that they have been investigating, to give them a chance to respond. Of course, njoba ngisho, I am not in any way dismissing my lived experiences of anyone who has engaged with them. If umuntu feels ukuthi mhlawumbe they probably have come to you today, and it is something in the industry that we talk about, I cannot be investigating, or in fact, let me not even talk about an investigation that has taken longer. If, say, I am working for a Sunday publication and I come across the information that is going to require a comment, say, by Tuesday or Wednesday, a press code does not allow I only approach you on Saturday or on Friday evening for you to comment when I have had the information, especially in cases where the information is verified. Sometimes I would only come to you on a Friday simply because I was also still verifying. But in cases where I have verified by Tuesday or Wednesday, the press code is very clear. I do also need to give you enough chance to respond. And it is unfortunately slightly different in my cases, daily publications, where you are working against a very tight deadline, and you probably come across a story at, say, 3 p.m. and your deadline is 8 p.m. But I think as we move along, we do talk about how to try and work around that and mitigate that. But I think also this is where honorable members should ask more of your communications teams, because they are supposed to help you navigate situations anjalo. But people can investigate in cases where they are, focus is investigations. The only obligation is to ensure that you are given a fair chance to respond. And press code is very clear on that. But I do accept in certain instances, it is something that does not happen, and it is not to justify it. It also depends on deadlines, because there's no point in also coming to you, asking you to respond to information that it has not been verified. It is worth asking, can you respond to one or two? As the other questions, okay, if not, we can move on to the next slide if there are also no questions on virtual. Okay. The slide is missing. Thank you. Okay, so the objectives of e-journalism. Oh, sorry, yes. Check, I mean, news as follow under which category? It fall under publications isiZulu, but it is independently owned, so it's not part of the big group. In fact, yeah, kumaphepha isiZulu really it's ilanga isolezwe and ibayede your main mainstream. And then the rest are either online or community newspapers. Thank you. Okay, the objectives of journalism. This is where we talk about why something is news, even in instances where we may disagree that it is news. So we really, as media, there are three objectives of media. It is to inform, educate, and entertain. And then when we do that, or when that happens, those three categories, there are then subcategories that inform what it is that is informative, what it is that is educative or empowering, and what it is that is entertaining. So primarily, the main category is that it must be new information. So if it is announced for the first time that President Ramaphosa is cutting his overseas trip short to come and attend to load shedding, it is news. It will be news, besides the fact that it is the president, but because it is new and because, of course, it impacts the lives of South Africans. So anything that is new will be news, but also what will also be news is something that is unusual, something that is peculiar. Journalism school, they would say it is a story if you say that a dog has given birth because to a human, that is because it is something that you would not expect, but if a dog has given birth really to puppies, then it is not a story. So it has to be unusual. Yeah, and of course, unfortunately, also when it is horrifying, like we've seen with the accidents or anything, honestly, that is unfortunately bad news. This is also where often there'll be disagreement, because sometimes people will think that, but why do bad news sell? But bad news, horrifying news sell. And that is just the reality. It does. But it is also news, as I've mentioned, if it is empowering. This could be groundbreaking research that is maybe a record. It could be anything that will really help people to be empowered. And of course, if it is exciting, that is why if you pay attention, you will see that some of the biggest covered stories are around entertainment and even sports, because people enjoy entertainment and they enjoy the exciting and funny stories. So that is really what makes up news. Of course, as I say, often or sometimes there'll be disagreement over whether something is news or not, especially when it comes to izinto that impact personal lives of people like honorable members who may be people in the public eye, and you may perhaps feel that but this is private, why should it be in the news? And unfortunately for you, if your work that you do, if you are in the public office, there is a very thin line between what is public and what is private. But again, there are clear guidelines. For example, if we go and we visit you, maybe there's been, maybe you've had a death in the family, unless you are really comfortable with speaking to the media, you are not obligated to. You know, even when if money were to go to the families from the accident victims from Opongola, those families are not necessarily obligated to speak to the media if they do not want to. And there's no press code that forces us to get a comment from them. Some families, of course, will have a family spokesperson, and in instances like this where you'll find sometimes the provincial government will be there, and maybe it will then be someone from the government that will speak. But when it comes to your personal lives, though, there's a very fine line, and it is something that I would honestly say you have to make peace with. That if you are in the public office, what you do, what I can get away with is not what you can get away with, and just be saying but you know, I'm sure there are a lot of questions around what I've just said, and I'm happy to engage. So if I hear you well, as Lindile, you are saying, because we are in the public eye, or we are doing public work, I want to say what you did not say. Nothing is confidential. Is that what you are saying? No, there are things which are confidential, and the laws are clear. So, for example, and I know that mistakes have been made and breaches have happened, but there are things which are confidential. So, at no point, for example, can we publish your health records. And I say upfront, I know it has happened, but it does not excuse that I'm not even going to sugarcoat. It was a breach of the law which should not have happened. There is no law which says, you know, there's a reason why, for example, even if there's a story that perhaps refers to your financial matters, and perhaps there are even accusations, but you will always see that if we go to, say, SARS will never disclose to the media anything pertaining to your financial matters. So the law is clear on matters like that. So you do have a protection, but when it comes to that impact your work, and Nakona, I guess, if, for example, we start going to a court case and the records become public, then it's a different matter. In fact, I'll make another example. The law is very clear on divorce cases, except in instances where it is the parties involved who are divorcing, even if they are not prominent members of the public by virtue of the work that they do. At no stage we are allowed to disclose divorcing parties. At no stage at all. Not unless they come forward and they decide to do it. And Nakona, the judge can actually still prohibit it, because they always look at the interest of the children. So you are protected, but there are certain things that unfortunately that will be scrutinized more than abanye abantu by virtue of umsebenzi wakho.
Yeah, the first question is, because you are in the political space, I'm being honest, I'm not targeting anyone. why does the media put more effort to the governing party most of the time? Because we are human beings, we live together, we know what is happening, but there's no dwelling in other parties, but the governing one is in trouble. But if it's having positives, it's rare to get it being publicized, even the president, even the premier or whoever, if they're doing good. Uthi mawulandela ukuthi ngoba ibinhle nje lento kufanele ngabe all over but ibe ncane kodwa embi iba nkulu. Why are we doing that as South Africans? Media. The second one, I'll cite some cases of politicians across the board. If there's a negative case, it goes all over and it becomes nasty. Do you ever think that human being can be killed by the ratepayers or the public at large? And once the case is over, that particular case is not as it was reported, the judge dismissed the case. After that, it's written in smaller letters in the media, not like before, because once it stays all over. It has happened to me before, whilst I was Malanga. It was all over. But once it was over, people didn't know that. Did you ever think, or the media, did you ever think that something that is sensitive, sometimes it can put the life of individual in danger? Take it for example. What has happened to the mayor somewhere? What if they are lying about him? And at the end of the day, the public is thinking, once it cleared, the air is cleared, that particular individual is not safe at all. I'm worried the way the media publicize things. Media is okay. We can see the objectives, we're happy about them, but I'm always worried about the lives of the innocent people because, to be clear, it happens after.
Can I make it? I just want to check whether is it legally correct for the media to publicize for example, my private life without me being consulted. Is it legally correct?
Chairperson. Chair.
Honourable Member.
Chairperson, I also want to join the former speakers that has been said about the media. I just wanted to hear some ladies doing us the presentation that if they say all the members should be scrutinized about their lifestyle, thereafter maybe they are thinking there's something wrong with that somebody else, that particular somebody, only to find that what they've been thinking about is not correct. How are they going back to the public and tell them that what we've been thinking about this matter, about this person is wrong, yet everything has been done, it has been publicized in all the papers. I don't know how are they going to do that, to incorrect the mistake they've done. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chairperson, honourable members. I just wanted to check that if I heard you correctly, you said sometimes the journalists are pushed by the time frames. That you sometimes think that it's not fair. You just rush to publish the story without consulting a person who's involved. And is it not true what we believe most of the time that the newspapers usually are competing, they are competing that which newspaper has got many buyers or supporters. So you rush to publish the story without getting the real thing which happened. And another concern which we have, sometimes we find a journalist write a wrong thing about a person. And when the journalist need to, or the editor need to apologize or to correct what she wrote or he wrote, it will be in small letters at the back pages of the newspaper. But when they publish a scandal, it will be in big, bold letters, you know, on the front page. But you'll see a small thing when you go to the site where they are advertising some tenders or business issues. And then you see a small thing, they're apologizing what they said about Mayor Magumete or about Muteli's whatever, or about Premier. Why does those people do that? Because most of the journalists, I think most of them are, I know, when we've got functions, even in legislature, are black people, our own people, but they like to publish scandals about their. I don't say you must cover me if I've got some wrong things which I'm doing, but really we get so concerned because most of the time the journalists they rush compete with the paper. Isheshe come get the story. Who told you it's negative and it's wrong? For instance, she has just been mentioning there's something trending these days about a certain mayor. And you get information from the mayors who were there at the funeral. The mayor was not even attending that scene where some two councillors were shot at Msina. The mayor was somewhere in another meeting with mayors, but everybody heard when the other one was announcing the funeral that it's the mayor who was shooting them. So we've got these things which we don't understand really, to our black people oppressing other black people. I don't say you must cover us, but you get the truth of the story. And then when we must apologize, just writing all the front page as you did when you announced it, Upumzi is corrupt, she has done this and that. And when you discover the truth, it's a back page. Why journalists do that? Thank you, Ngwan.
Thank you. Okay. So I was. Oh, sorry. Yes.
It's Honorable Governor. Chairperson, I think we are not being fair to the presenters, my view, in that we are expecting them to almost like, or we're voicing our complaints about the media to them. I think this session is supposed to be for us how to handle the media. And what I would suggest is that in the response, if the presenters could outline what are the measures that can be taken in order to direct complaints or concerns of individuals who have been reported on in the media incorrectly. So if we could get an idea of what is the legislative framework for that, what are the processes with the various media households to address our complaints, and the issue that I raised earlier on, the complaints that we raise when incorrect issues are raised on social media. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair,
Oh, sorry.
before that, I thought you are in the workshop and you are allowed to echo whatever you want to echo so that we are clear. Junior as we are, but we are here to empower ourselves. If we all as members, we can allow ourselves, as I was saying, as Honorable Teles was saying, we're citing examples that as leaders, maybe what media is doing, how can we navigate and it doesn't happen? All of us across the board. If we've done something wrong, we apologize.
Okay, thank you. So I will start with why do we pay, or why does the media pay too much attention to the ANC or the ruling party? It's very simple, Ma. It is because you're the ruling party. It is because you are the governing party, and if tomorrow the governing party were to be the EFF or the DA or the IFP, or the same would happen. It is just like, if I were to make another example, if we look at our stats in South Africa, often you will find that those stats will reflect a lot on Black people because we are the majority in the country. So if we talk about poverty, yes, there are historical issues, and I am not in any way discounting those, but I'm just saying that by virtue of being the majority and the ruling party, a lot of the attention, and also because you are the ones, yes, government is made up of different parties, but you are the ruling party, and you are the ones that South Africans have given the majority of their vote to say, please lead this country. So, yeah. And when it comes to issues of safety, at no point does the media write any article or report any story with a sinister agenda, or with motives to jeopardize anyone's lives. But unfortunately, as I mentioned, that by virtue of the work that you are doing, people will pay attention to what you do, and you will be scrutinized more than other people, but not necessarily with the intention of putting your life in danger, or taking away your privacy life. And yes, apologies are often smaller because apologies don't sell the paper. And I'm going to be honest, apologies don't sell the paper, and newspapers, in fact, the media organizations, like any other industry, people are running businesses. And in running businesses, but this is not to say that you are allowed to be irresponsible, to be inconsiderate. But well, maybe if it were to happen for the first time, people would buy the paper if you saw it in the shelves and it had this huge apology, because it has never happened before. But on a regular basis, people wouldn't buy the paper if you're selling it, with an apology. People have an obligation to sell. People have an obligation to their businesses. It is also livelihoods. I think what perhaps you need to utilize more other platforms and the avenues that are available. This is to really engage a press council. Except for Independent Media SA, all the media houses, including community media publications, they belong to what is called the Press Council of South Africa. And that is where you can take your complaints, and there's an ombudsman. And there have actually been instances where the ombudsman rules that the apology must also be on the front page. There have been those instances. So I think that it is just in knowing when you engage the ombudsman. Independent Media SA may not belong to the Press Council anymore, but they do have an internal ombudsman, Wakhona. And Wakhona, when you engage them, the ombudsman, in instances where the publication is wrong, you can say that, because in fact what the ombudsman has in recent cases been saying is that if the article, and I'll just stick with ePrint here, and I will talk about what they say when it comes to broadcasting. So what the ombudsman has said is, if the article was on page 3, then the apology must be on page 3. If the article was on page 1, then the apology must be on page 1. If the story was read in a 7 a.m. bulletin, say on any radio station, then the apology must also be either that 7 a.m. bulletin or at least 8 a.m., but where you are probably, it's the same listenership, because people also have patterns of listening, so that is what, but in instances where it doesn't happen, and this is where, depending on who you are then utilizing, this is where your legal departments must come in and ensure that you get these rulings. This is where also your comms teams and advisors must come in. And of course, if you think that and if you have engaged the ombudsman before and you feel that that system doesn't work the way you would prefer it to work, you can go directly to the courts. Of course, I will say that it is something that we always hope that it doesn't happen, because we would like for there to always be cordial relationships between those who are in government and the media, because you have a responsibility to the people of South Africa, and we have a responsibility to assist you with updating the people of South Africa, with sharing information, whatever it is. And of course, we have a responsibility to hold you accountable. But if honestly you feel that the ombudsman route doesn't work for you, you can go to the court. But I would like to just stress, and your legal departments will also tell you this, you cannot go to the ombudsman, get a ruling, and then decide that you are not happy with it, and then say you will go to court. The ombudsman's ruling is binding, so you can choose either or. So it's either you go to the ombudsman and you will live with that outcome, or you ignore that route and you just go directly to the court. But again, we hope it is not the court. And as media houses, we are struggling. We don't really have money for attorneys, but yeah, so that is that. But also, because from the engagements thus far, it is clear there's always a need to improve and understand how the other party works, which is why, for example, today's workshop is happening. I would strongly also recommend that you perhaps also try and engage the South African National Editors Forum, because also, for some of the members, people who have been in public service for a long time, you would probably know that there are particular names of editors that you probably knew, but those names are no longer there. Just to also, I think that engagement would more than anything serve to, you get an update on who's running which newsroom currently, because there have been changes, there have been retrenchments in news organizations, people have left the industry for either the private sector or even for government communications. So maybe you just meet and understand who's there, and also just chat to them about, your specific, maybe come to them with certain examples, but just perhaps it would be worth considering engaging either SANEF and even the community media. I belong to both organizations. I am a member of SANEF, and I am also a member of the Association of Independent Publishers. So, we could also help facilitate that. And I think that it would be worth it. And the good thing as well with SANEF is an editors forum of all, especially the commercial newspapers that I'm sure a lot of the times you want to perhaps engage with more. I would really, I think suggest that. You are not consulted and it's a private, no, it is at no point does the press code permit that anything should be published that impugns your name or your integrity and you are not consulted. And when I say that sometimes there are deadline pressures, yes, there are, but as I mentioned, I think this is where, again, I also want to say that this is where communications teams should also come in. And in certain instances, editors are able to say that they will wait and not run, the story. And yes, there is competition because people are in business, but it is not to the level of wanting, certainly not with professional and mainstream publications or media. There's no story that is worth publishing if it is not verified, because the ramifications from that are huge. Because as the media, we rely on our credibility, and if people start believing that you do not have credibility, then the losses are far larger than whatever gains publishing that one article would have brought. Yeah. Yes, ma'am, comment.
I just want to thank you about your honesty to say that the story, once you find truth, is not does not worthy to put it in the front page, because it's not selling anymore. At least we know, and it's been happening. Think about that, and also thank you to empower us by saying that if the story was on the front page, they must also do so. If it was in the second or third, they must also do so. And the South African Editors Forum, a newsroom, all what you have told about, I should think I'm quite happy about that. But I'm still insisting that please try across the board, even if it's a business person or whoever, to verify as much as you can before it's all out, because the safety of a human being for me is important, not politicians only, just a human being. Because sometimes you get to know about these things if you are looking at TV or in the newspaper, that later you get that no, the story was not authentic. So not in a bad way, because as you have said it, on our side we are a ruling party, and also all of us who are politicians. Yes, media like stories on the side of the ruling party and also on other members. I'm not worried about that. I'm just worried about the way sometimes, not every time.
Thank you. If there are no other questions, we can move on to the next slide. I think it will be the last one before the break. Now the next one. Yes, thank you. Okay, we've touched a bit on this, why there is a strong focus on political coverage. And it is honestly because the world is run by political systems. It doesn't matter what may be happening, but because we are ruled, or countries are ruled by politicians and political systems, so a lot of the focus will be on politics. Whether it is because we are still under colonialism in our country, that will be the focus. And as we move to a democracy, that also happens. And right now, you would know better than me as politicians, but our democracy is maturing. We have more political parties than we did, say, in 1994. So there will continue to be that focus. And of course, we are in the legislature. This is where the laws and regulations are made. And of course, in a country, especially like South Africa, where the majority of the citizens depend on the government for their basic services, this is housing, water, education, health, people look unto political leaders to provide those services. So that is why there is also that strong focus. And there are always new developments in the political system, whether it is laws being amended, whether it is new political parties, whether it is cabinet reshuffles. there are always new developments. And of course, this is where, because as the media, we serve the role of educating, this is also where we get to educate the public about how to access A and how to access B. And of course, every now and then we are entertained by politicians, as we have learned in recent years in our country. So those are really, but the crux of the matter is that we are in a world that is led by political systems, and a lot happens through political systems. That is the reason why a lot of the coverage focuses on politics. It impacts everyone's daily lives, and yeah, I don't know if there are any questions or yeah, Mama.
Can it be correct that journalists, editors are also voters? That will inadvertently influence the reporting on party politics. I'm not saying it does. I'm asking a question. Thank you.
Okay. Is it related to the question? Okay.
Chairperson and other members, I just want to, although I'm not a facilitator, but I just wish to respond to what Honorable Committee is saying, that she's asking a question, but I do confirm that as we are voters, and some of you can show a serious hatred. For instance, I'll make an example of Mondli Makai. Even last week, there was a big march in Johannesburg when people went to complain about every time he's got attacks on a person, a particular person, and saying negative things which are not true. But he's still kept there. I don't know whether he's the owner of that newspaper, City Press, but really, I can't understand why. So what Honorable Committee is asking, it's true that it's not fair. This job, I don't know, because everybody is a voter. I can't say it must be, journalists must be people who don't vote or who don't belong to parties. It's impossible. Because I always complain when a person tells me, I'm now voting, I'm Christian. Then I say, you mustn't ever talk about service delivery anywhere if you say you don't vote. So really, it's not fair. Most of them are doing that. They put negative things if they hate a person, a leader of that party, or the party itself. Then creating wrong stories. He was a murderer or this and that, which is not true. I don't know why journalists do that. They do really. You find the real politicians don't do that. But I'm making an example. Thank you, Mkwan.
I see there's a hand on the virtual platform, so maybe I'll take that as well. Or is it an older hand? Okay. All right. Yes, we vote. We are South Africans, and it is our right to vote. Yes, we vote just like we have favorite musicians, we have favorite soccer teams. At some point, in fact, at the beginning of my career, I was a soccer writer, but yes, I support Orlando Pirates, and but there are guidelines which help us, and I always say though it is meant to say they help us to be objective, but actually more than anything, because I think that if you strive for objectivity, then you are striving for perfection, which is not possible, and it would mean that you exist in an island. We are products of our socialization as journalists as well, and we are part of the community. So, but there are guidelines which help us to be fair and to be balanced. And in being fair and balanced, unfortunately, sometimes you will not necessarily agree with everything that we write, if not most of the times. And it is okay to disagree as well, as long as we have ticked the box of being fair, of being balanced, and crucially of being truthful. You know, that the headline doesn't sit well is not an issue, as long as though it is truthful, it is fair, it is balanced. And yes, sometimes it may also come across that the criticism is as a result of favoring a particular party over another, but it is not necessarily that, because I think that political members of the ruling party, for example, also always often feel that the ruling party is the one that gets, you know, the wrath of the media, and they think that it is because maybe the media does not necessarily support a particular party or the ruling party, and vice versa. But more than anything, it is also informed by being members also, as I say, of the society. If I write a column that talks about load shedding, and I am scathing, say, on ESCOM, and say on the Department of Energy, and say on the Department of Public Enterprises, because ESCOM falls under both Department of Energy and DPE. It is not necessarily because I have an issue with the ministers who run those departments, but as a citizen as well, and also reflecting, because we reflect as well what the audiences that we write for talk about. It is more than anything also that, but it is something that I also, as a citizen, that I also experience. But here's what I want to also say. It is unfortunate that our media industry in South Africa is small, because we are, as a country, we are also a small country. At 60 million, we are a very small country. Because in other jurisdictions, which are far larger than us, and I will make an example with the USA, how the media operates, yes, there is a press code, but you always often know that these particular media houses lean to the Democrats or the Republicans. And this is something that happens openly, but our democracy has not matured to that level. And we do not have enough media houses. As much as what I showed you at the beginning, it may look like we have a lot of media houses, but actually our media sector in South Africa is a very small sector. And unfortunately, if it happens that there are instances, a slight instance of that you have a media house that openly says that we lean to the left or we lean to the right, or whatever the case is, often it is not something that even society, I'm not even talking about leaders in society, I'm just talking about generally the citizens themselves, who we expect that they should either spend data going on to this website, or they should spend money buying the newspapers, are not even ready for. So that is why I say that unfortunately ours, yes, we are a maturing democracy, but we are not there yet. And I will make an example. If you recall, okay, the unfortunate and fraud and that happened. If you look at what the New Age was trying to do, South Africa was not ready for it, because then a lot of the times what was being said was that, oh, the New Age is a publication of the ruling party. And I say that, as I say, I do not justify what the owners of the New Age stood for and what they did. But what they were trying to do, where they were saying, create a balance so that you have just as much coverage on the progress which is being made by government and across the country, because they covered all provinces. The country was not ready for that. For the past 4 years, we've had an online publication which was called New Frame, and unfortunately it had funding issues and it had to fold. But the New Frame came on board in 2018, and they said that they would lean to the left. And even the way that the New Frame, yes, there were people who celebrated and who accepted the New Frame, but largely citizens were not ready for that. So until also we get to the point where it could be like in America, where you know that if you engage with publication X or radio station Y, you know, they lean to which side when it comes to political ideology. We will always have the debate and we will have to agree to disagree and on certain issues. Okay, I think according to our program, we take a break now, Linda? Yes. If there are no other questions on the virtual platform either, then we can take a break.
Thank you. How long is going to be a break?
I think about 15 minutes. So let's just take a break.
15 minutes. Okay. We're now going to have a break, and you are invited to breakfast. All of you, even those who are who joined visual.
Can I continue? Thanks. If, for example, President Ramaphosa, say, for example, would attend a funeral of the victims of Basopongol, and if he will allocate time to speak to the media, I can assure you, and his communications team knows this, there's no way that we would not ask about load shedding. There's no way we would not ask about the bus in London. There's no way we would not ask about, anything and everything. And there's really, it's just for you to anticipate, and your communications team must help you, and how to best prepare for interviews besides anticipating, depending on the nature of the interview, for really interviews that are planned in advance. You are allowed to also ask for questions beforehand so that you can prepare for yourself. It's quite, it's common practice, and the media does not frown upon giving you questions, but more often than not, they will also say that, but also please bear in mind that there may be follow-up questions depending on your responses. So you may ask for questions beforehand so that you can prepare yourself, but critically is really to get your communications team to help you to anticipate other issues that people may want to also focus on. And I want to go to the letters to the editor. When it comes to, and I will perhaps make examples, primarily newspapers. When it comes to letters to the editor, you will not perhaps be aware, but one of the most read sections, it is the letters to the editor section. That is one of the most read sections. So do not underestimate. In fact, it also addresses what you raised earlier about apologies. Besides an apology, before you can even take that route, you can write a letter to the editor and say you want to set the record straight. And yes, a letter to the editor is also, depending on the length, is also edited. But this is also where having relationships with media organization comes in handy, because you can submit a letter that is perhaps 500 words, and depending on the type of publication, that letter, if it is too long, sometimes if lines of communication are open, they can send it back to you and say, look, it is too long and we want to ensure that we cover as much as possible of what you wanted covered in your letter. Do you want to edit it yourself and cut it so that it, to say to a particular length, and then you run it? So do not underestimate the letters to the editor section, because it is a platform. That is also where readers have power, because letters that are published in that section are readers' letters. That is why readers also read it, because they want to see if their letters are covered. And sometimes you will see, depending on the issue that's at hand, we would allow an issue to go on for maybe even a month, where there's engagement between the readers themselves. And then you then get to a point where, because you want to also give other readers a chance, you will then say as an editor that, look, we are moving on from this issue and we will not entertain letters from this issue again. But it is a very critical section, and you can use it. But also the op-ed stroke thought leadership. And this is again where your communications team comes in, because they are supposed to write those op-ed pieces. You can just give them a brief to say, look, I would like to address issue A, B, and C. Can you maybe write a letter for me? There are speech writers, there are communications teams. Utilize those resources. But also, there are podcasts you can also initiate. As a legislature, I don't know if you do have one, but you can have one as KZN Legislature. Have your own podcast. Communicate what you want to communicate, and let your communications team help you to promote it so that people listen to it. And of course, you have your social media pages. I will, in one of the subsequent slides, talk more about social media. And yes, there are then press conferences as well. And press conferences is another platform where, yes, you may say that you are calling a press conference to talk about issue A, but you have to anticipate that there will be other questions outside whatever you have called the press conference for. I will take questions and clarity at this point before we move on from this slide. Any questions on the virtual platform? No, nothing. Okay, please go ahead and ask your question. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to find out whether or not there's any cost involved or licensing involved, etc., etc. And what are the rules of podcasts? Thank you.
I think that if the legislature were to have a podcast, the copyright would belong to the legislature because it would be the legislature's content. There are various options which will, I'm sure then there are also procurement processes as the legislature that you would have to follow if you will bring in an independent party. But if it is something that will be completely run by your internal team, for example, I run an online publication and we have a podcast where we subscribe. It is hosted by a platform called Iono FM, which a lot, in fact, of your major radio stations also use. So it would really be just a matter of maybe getting your comms team to explore the different options and then follow, your normal procurement processes. But there are no licensing or any sort of stringent processes that have to happen before you can set up a podcast. Yes, thank you.
I just want to know exactly what are the pressing things that will require a person to call a press conference. Can I just call a press conference, or there should be a pressing thing to call a press conference?
I think ideally there should be something that you would like to communicate that perhaps you feel would be better addressed if you engaged face to face. In light of all the other resources that are available, if you feel that issuing a press statement would not suffice, then perhaps, maybe if it is something where beyond just the members engaging, and maybe you need to bring in, say, the lawyers of the legislature, and maybe then, the media can engage those experts directly, or, but if though it can be addressed, I think via the other models, then you should do that, because there are also, and I will talk about it when I talk about why you are covered and why you are not covered. There are serious resource challenges that media companies have. But if there's something that you strongly feel will be better handled If you engaged in person, then yes, you call a press conference. And sometimes, of course, you besides the face-to-face engagement, it is another model that helps you to strengthen the relationships with media organization, because you get to see who is, you see the faces behind the bylines or behind the voice in cases, because sometimes maybe those who work for television, you know them, but a lot of the times you just know the bylines. For those who are in print and with radio, you know the voices, and yes, again, the byline, and with online as well, you just know the byline, but you don't really know the people. But when you've met, lines of communication improve. So yeah. Okay, if there are no other questions, we can move on to the next slide. Thank you.
There was no hand this side.
Was there a hand? Oh no,
No hand. Oh, okay.
Okay. Relevant people in newsrooms. I know that a lot of the times, this is, when I say relevant people, I mean in relation to pitching your stories. A lot of the times people think that it is editors who matter, but it is actually news editors who matter, because they are the first point of call. They are the ones who, in fact, sometimes they even know before the editor how many pages do we have today. Because how generally it works practically, if we speak about newspapers, for a daily newspaper, around this time, you will start getting a sense of how many pages, not tomorrow's paper. What's tomorrow? Thursday, Friday's paper, because tomorrow's paper was finalized yesterday and probably changed a bit this morning. I'm talking about the number of pages, which are also determined largely by advertising. So today, around this time, you start getting a sense of what Friday's book, how big or small it will be. And then you are able to start deciding that what it is that you will prioritize and how. And that is a conversation that happens between the news editor and the advertising team. And in instances where there is something major that really needs then the intervention of the editor, then the editor comes into that conversation. Often the editor will come into a conversation where there's a late ad and advertising would really like to get it in. And so it is only the editor who can then decide that, okay, we are dropping story A so that we can accommodate to that particular ad. So it is very important to know the news editors. In the case of broadcasting, it would do you well to know the producers, not the presenters. Trust me. And the producers make those decisions. They have the power. And if you can convince the news editors that you've called a press conference today and it is worth assigning a news editor, a reporter to, half of your job is done, because they also know the resources and that are available. They know who's on leave, who's not on leave. Yes, the editor will also know, but generally the news editor reports to the editor, but the reporters report to the news editors. So it is very important to know the news editors, and most publications have a list. They say who the editor is, who the news editor is. So look at that, get those emails, but also most news companies as well have what we call mass emails. So while it is also useful to know the people, the individuals, but to also have the generic emails. In the case of Isolezo, if you send an email to isolezo@inl.co.za, it lands in everyone's inbox. So it wouldn't matter who may be on leave or who may have left the organization, but everyone else will have access to that email. So get generic email addresses as well, because also pre-COVID, I would say, have the office numbers, but having office numbers these days is actually not as useful because a lot of the people continue to work virtually. So, but the emails, people have access to them. And of course, yes, as I mentioned earlier, knowing the editors is also useful, especially at the level of this engagement which we are having today, where there are certain issues that you really want to ventilate and to speak to the people who are the final decision makers. Editors are the final decision makers. They can overrule the news editor and they can overrule the reporters. But when it comes to resource allocation, your best bet are the news editors. And that is really often where your stories are either accepted or rejected before they even get to the editor. So yeah, I'll take questions, clarity, engagement. I think we can move on to the next slide. Is there a question? No. No, the next one, I think that one was just duplicated. Okay. This slide, the previous slide is actually linked to this one. So one of the best ways to leverage coverage or to ensure that you are covered is by knowing who to pitch to. As I've mentioned, that your key people are the news editors and the producers. But also, besides knowing who to pitch to, it is also knowing when to pitch. So this is understanding the production cycles. When it comes to, for example, a Sunday publication, if you're going to come to them, unless it is really a breaking story, if you're going to pitch an op-ed or a letter to the editor to them, say on a Friday, it is late already. Because those pages, inside pages, work also from the inside out. Because the inside pages are the pages that have either opinion, op-ed, and your light stories, if you will. But then your much stronger stories are actually on your more upfront pages. When it comes to radio, if I make an example with, say, a current affairs program, you have a current affairs program on your KZN or say on SAFM. Sunrise starts at 6 to 8 before it is the debate. So around 6, it would be your not so strong stories, but as the day progresses, because then the number of listeners are increasing, then your stronger stories are there. So in the case of KwaZulu-Natal with Ezanamusha, after 6 a.m., there's the 6 a.m. bulletin. That's when your strongest stories, those last 20 minutes until 6:30, your strongest stories. So that principle applies even with newspapers. So if you want to pitch an op-ed, say to a Sunday Times, then you pitch that op-ed on Tuesday, or at least at your very latest on Wednesday, because the Sundays work from Tuesday to Saturday, and those who work for daily publications work from Sunday to Thursday. So maybe with daily publications, you can pitch really at any time, but again, when in the day you pitch matters. With daily publications, letters to the editor's page, opinion pages, those columns that you see by the different people, say column by Umpumelelo Zigalala, which you will see on a Wednesday on Isolezwe. It's actually that page is done the night before. So it also depends on when in the day you pitch. So it's very important to know when to pitch, because you will say that, you may say, they don't cover us. but it is because by the time you approach them, the resources have been allocated already. Or that particular page where the story would fit is done already. And then the how part is also just as important. I don't know, because I've never worked in government communications, whether it is the politicians themselves or the political leaders, or whether it is the comms teams who make this decision. But one of the weaknesses with stories that come from politics or political environments is that a lot of the times, as much as I know what I said earlier and what I'm about to say now may sound like a paradox, as much as what I said earlier, that politics attract a lot of coverage. But where the weakness is when a lot of the time you want to sell the political principle more than the program. So say, I don't know, I remember there was I don't know if it's still there was a youth business program in the Premier's office. I think it was called Operation Vula. And I remember that program, because I know some people who benefited from it, it assisted youth-owned businesses with particular resources. And they didn't give them necessarily cash. If you needed a bakkie, they would buy a bakkie for you, and then there'd be a handover. If you needed a compressor, they would buy a compressor, depending on what line business your company is in. So when you're going to do the handover, typically an invitation from the Premier's office will want to talk about the fact that the Premier is going to hand over. And fair enough. But, you know, because there are no resources and because of it, you're just thinking, oh, well, the Premier is going there again. Well, the Premier's office has a photographer. So just please send us, you know, sometimes the response would be, please send us a statement and the pictures. We cannot go there. But the minute you start sending an invitation, which, yes, we'll still talk about the Premier's handover, but also just a teaser on the beneficiaries to say, not just a generic youth-owned businesses, but give us a little bit on what these businesses are about and what are some of the things that you make it about the beneficiaries, make it about the constituencies, make it about the public more than the political principle. So sometimes that is where the biggest weakness is when it comes to these things. And unfortunately, it just becomes difficult to keep chasing. And that is why sometimes you'll also feel that the good stories or the positive stories are not covered enough. But it is unfortunately because of the way that they are sold. So the how part is very important. Yes.
Thank you. But I just wanted to maybe get your opinion on the very fact that you are asking us to focus, you know, more richly on the story as such, where it affects the constituencies and the actual work and who's going to benefit. But I think a big constraint, even on our side, is that when we try to do this, take a photo, for example, and then we do the story or the statement and send it to the media, sometimes or very often you will get a response that if you do not name, say, all the people in the photo, then that is a problem. So captioning becomes an issue. Or sometimes the media will say, but these are vulnerable people and we've got certain legislation that we have to like work within certain guidelines. And therefore, we wouldn't want to use the picture of, say, little children because it's against the Children's Act, you know, stuff like that. And that then inhibits us from doing our story. And yet I find that when the media runs an article that is of interest to them, they then take these photos and they use it in the paper when it's coming from their side. But when it's coming from the side of the politicians, then they start quoting certain regulations or laws. And I think that somewhere along the line, we got to see how to balance that out.
Yes, I think it would really vary from case to case. There are laws that govern us, and yes, there are certain pictures that we are not able to publish unless we know for certain that, you know, the necessary consent has been authorized. In fact, sometimes we even overrule the parents themselves. I know I've done that, where you know, a parent may be so frustrated and want to talk about whatever it is that maybe their child may be going through. It could be that maybe a child has a rare disease, and you know they want. But if we feel that you can tell the story without publishing the child, especially, you know, a child who may have that rare disease, but is still to a large extent is able to lead a normal life. So this is a child who goes to school. The last thing you want is to be splashing them on the front page when you can tell the story without necessarily humiliating the child like that. You know, it could be a mother whose child was maybe molested by a neighbor, and unknowingly, you know, in being desperate, maybe they've tried to approach law enforcement agencies, and then, but because the law is very clear, and even the press code will not publish a picture of a child who has been molested, even with parents giving consent. So I think it really varies. And yes, pictures that have faces of people that you can see clearly, and especially I think pictures with at least less than 5 people, you do want the names, but a group picture, you know, sometimes you are able to get away with it, you know, so it would vary from case to case. I don't know if there are any other questions. I don't know if there are any questions on the virtual platform. Then we can please move on to the next slide. If there are no other questions. Thank you. And this as well is also linked to everything that we've been talking about. And I've mentioned a bit that there are resources challenges, and perhaps you may not know the details of why there are resources challenges, but I've summarized them here. So part of it, because media organizations are a business, so if the economy is struggling and we have the kind of unemployment rate that you have, people just do not have money to spend either on data or on buying the newspaper. So the state of the economy impacts the media. And of course, what has also happened with traditional media is that with the advent of the internet and social media, that has also had an impact on what we call traditional media organizations. And linked to that, it is the declining advertising revenue. So companies are not advertising as much as they used to, or in cases where they continue to advertise, but it is not as frequent as it used to be. Again, it is tied to the economy. And the Google and Facebook duopoly, basically when it comes to online advertising, unfortunately, the only people who are really making money, it is Google and Facebook, and not traditional media organizations. And perhaps Linda could come in here and talk a bit about it, because she's actually also an advertising expert, and she can give you some examples. But also, unfortunately, everything else that I've spoken about are challenges that were already there before COVID. And when we then had the outbreak of COVID, it then just exacerbated the issues. And I've just given you a stat from the South African National Editors Forum that if you look at the number of journalism jobs that you had in the country in 2018, there were, or rather in 2008, there were at least 10,000 journalism jobs, but by 2018, this number had shrunk to 5,000. And I can tell you now that it is actually now below the 5,000, because there have been more retrenchments as a result of COVID-19. News 24, for example, retrenched about 660 people after COVID when it closed quite a number of publications, especially community news media publications. And then it closed the print edition of the Daily Sun, it closed the print edition of Drum Magazine, all of those which are publications that are owned by Media 24. It all had an impact. And there were, of course, retrenchments at the SABC as well. But this is also something that has happened globally. In the USA, there were at least about 2,000 publications that closed down as a result of COVID-19. So it is challenges that are there. And unfortunately, it then means that what can be covered is not what or what used to be covered is just unfortunately not what can be covered. To give you an example, when I started working, and I worked at the SABC in 1999 as an intern, it was the general elections. And as an intern, I was assigned to a South Coast, but I was assigned with 3 people. A cameraman and 2 senior journalists. And the brief from my news editors at the SABC was very clear. Yours is to go and shadow these people and observe. If you can file a story, it's okay, but we are not expecting a story from you. Those were the kind of resources that used to be in newsrooms. But today, interns are expected to go and cover elections instead of shadowing people. That is how dire the situation is. So unfortunately as well, some of the errors that happen also happen because of the juniorizations that has occurred in news organizations. And I thought that it would perhaps be useful to also give a bit of that context. I don't know, Linda, if you want to talk a bit about advertising.
Am I on? Okay. Now, when it comes to advertising, you would commonly know that most of the newspapers have a lot of ads, retail ads, government communication ads, and all of that. And in the past years, we've seen advertisers going, different routes, going online and, creating their own websites and everything. And that has had a negative impact on newspapers and radio ads as well, because now the advertisers have found alternative means of advertising. And for media houses, that means less money is coming in. And like Slee was explaining, with resources, if less money is coming in, then they are not able to hire as many journalists as they would like to. Then when you call in, there's a story someplace and they cannot send that many, they cannot send anyone because the resources are limited. So yeah, the advertising impact, it impacts negatively on the resources if there isn't much money coming in from advertisers. I don't know if I'm making any sense. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Linda. I'll take questions, points of clarity for this point. Okay. We can then, is there anything virtual? Oh, okay. We can then move on to the next slide. Thank you. Okay, new media. Yes. Before you continue, there are these people who use social media. They can use another company's name, maybe say Ukhozi radio station or East Coast Radio, but they are advertising their own things. And Ukhozi does not know anything about that thing. So how to deal with that thing? Can Ukhozi challenge the person who advertises using their name in social media? Because social media is open. Sometimes they just use someone else's name. They put that name, and then underneath they write something that the person did not say. Yes, they can. Actually, what I'm about to talk about now is to also hopefully try and clarify that the misinformation and disinformation that unfortunately happens, and why sometimes, unfortunately, people then tend to think it is credible and traditional media that does those things when it is actually not. So there is new media, new media is really online. These are media houses that do not print newspapers or magazines, and are not necessarily on your traditional broadcasting platforms. And sometimes, unfortunately, people think that it is the same as social media, and it is not. So with new media, the oldest new media website in South Africa is News 24. I think they are 22 years old. They are owned by Media 24. And then you have IOL, which is owned by Independent Media SA, or what used to be called Independent Newspapers. And then there is Times Live, which is part of the Arena Group. And then, well, you then have all your other media houses that have their own websites as well, like your Mail Guardian, your City Press. They all have their websites. But you also have the strictly online only publications, like Your Money Web, Business Insider. You have Vumbele, Scroller, you have Impembe. There have been quite a few also vernacular publications that have come up online in recent years. And it is important to make the distinction, because all the avenues that I have mentioned about how you can complain, how you can go to the press ombudsman if you so wish, or you can go to court, those avenues are also applicable to new media, because these are publications that also belong, or media organizations that also belong or subscribe to the Press Council. So yes, they may have a website, they may have a YouTube channel, or they may have a podcast, but they are also obligated to verify it before they publish. They are also obligated to give you a fair chance to respond. They are also obligated to make sure that what they report is truthful, is balanced, is accurate, and it is fair. So, and I think perhaps where the confusion sometimes comes is where you will see that, okay, this particular publication also has a Facebook page. And then because it has a Facebook page, you then think that what happens on social media, or what happens on this publication's social media page, anything goes simply because on social media, we have a sense that anything goes. But when it comes to publications that subscribe to the Press Council, even on social media, people are not allowed to publish information that has not been verified. And unfortunately, because of the disinformation and the example that you have given, Chairperson, it is also easy to create accounts on social media. And it is the conversation as media houses that we've been having with companies such as Meta, or what used to be called Facebook, and even companies such as Twitter, to say, please help us. And Meta is actually the most critical one, because as you may know, Facebook, WhatsApp, and Instagram belong to the same family. And then you have Google, which also owns YouTube. So those companies are critical, and the conversation globally is happening to say that you are able to verify accounts. Please help, especially even around election time, where there's a lot of propaganda and misinformation and disinformation that happens leading up to the elections. But it's critical to be able to distinguish between credible news outlets and just social media or fake social media accounts. And I think, again, this is also a role for your social media managers as well as your communications teams. I'll take questions. Okay, we can then. According to the program, that was the last slide before lunch. I don't know if you want to go to lunch, or should I continue and do social media? Continue.
I suggest that you continue, and then we just finish off, and then we go to lunch. Do you agree, members? It's agreed.
Thank you. So when it comes to social media, it is important to also be able to communicate through social media. As you can see, there's a very credible report which you can download. It is produced by a company called Worldwide Wax, which is very useful. They produce this report every year. It's called the Social Media Landscape Report in South Africa. So I've just taken some stats from their latest report, the 2022 report, which they released in June this year. But there are a lot more insights from this report, which would help you. 48% or 48.8% of adults in South Africa access social media. You will see the number: 45.7% own a smartphone with internet access, 7% own a feature phone with internet access, 68% access the internet. And the main media social platforms in South Africa is WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn. There is something that they call metaverse, which they say is becoming popular, but I didn't really dwell on it. It is still a new element, but I think maybe in next year's report we will see more information on metaverse. And then they, as I say, they share a whole lot of insights. It's a 100-page odd report, but one of the things that they look at when they look specifically at Twitter are some of the most mentioned Twitteratis or Twitters, and President Ramaphosa and Julius Malema among the most mentioned. And I just focused from the list, I think that 10, and those were the two politicians who featured. And I thought, because of it would be of interest to you, instead of also talking about people in other sectors. I share these stats just to also, as I'm sure you may be aware, but to illustrate how important communicating through social media is, which I'd mentioned, and that's why I even put on the table the suggestion of perhaps having a podcast where the legislature will update, and you can even, when it's Women's Month, for example, you could interview women MPLs and just profile them and let people look forward to that, among other things that you could do. You will know the calendar. There are many themes. Right now it's heritage, and next month will be breast cancer month, and of course what happens in the legislature. So social media is important, and WhatsApp is very accessible, and it's important, I think, that to reach people through these platforms, so that also it is also probably the easiest and the largest platforms you can use to really set the record straight, to set the agenda, if you will, when it comes to what you would like the public to consume, when you would like it to consume it, and how you would like it to consume it. Of course, this is not to say that just because you've put it out there in your own platform, it will not be questioned, it will not be challenged, or that it will not be verified. And in fact, those of you who do engage on social media, you will realize, especially on Twitter, that you better go into that platform and make sure that you have your facts. You're not going to try and feed people information which is inaccurate and think that they will just lap it up. They will challenge you, and they will challenge you instantly. If the information is not accurate. So yeah, that is really how social media, that is the state of social media in a really summarized format for you. And I strongly suggest that you do familiarize yourself with it, and that you also use it. And I'm going to talk about trending, but I think I'll take questions if there are. Yes.
Thank you. Whilst on social media and what you've just spoken about now in terms of challenging the information which might not be correct, there is now what is called TikTok. And I worry about TikTok because people take the content that is already there from someone or from a speech, and then they change it, they dilute it. I don't know what is the correct word. Is that acceptable? Is there, I know you've been talking about other things, and you said there were policies, there were guidelines. Now TikTok, when you told it's mixed, what I'm saying, and then in between mixed with what Honorable Zwagi is saying to make sense or to sell for that person. So I don't know. What can you say about that?
Okay, that generally is not news media organizations. It's just people, users on the platform, who will take the information, mix it with either music, or it becomes a challenge if something happens in the legislature and then it happens to be captured on camera, and then it goes viral or it trends, as we say, but it is not news media organizations who often do those things. So it's the nature of the users on social media platforms. And TikTok is populated by a much younger user. So yeah, and unfortunately, as news media organizations, there is nothing much you can do about it. But of course, in cases where a story is misrepresented, it is a huge challenge. That is why, as I mentioned earlier, that the conversation with the owners of these platforms between news media organizations has started, because in cases where a legitimate story is misrepresented, it does unfortunately create credibility challenges for us, where again people are not able to distinguish between credible news media organizations and just users on these platforms. But I think it precisely emphasizes what I said, to say you also, as the legislature, you have power on these platforms, and you must also use that power, because they are platforms that have given people power to be able to reach large numbers of people and to decide what they put on it. Because unfortunately, there are no editors, to decide and unfortunately to verify. So with everything, there are pros and cons to it. But one of the pros is that social media does give you power, to be able to control the narrative. But I also stress that do not expect people to just lap it up. It will be challenged and it will be questioned. Yes.
Ngiyabonga. Mhlambe ngifuna ukuchecka kune-video umntana usekwayithinta le yenzeke eMsinga funeral. Leyo video iyatrenda. Mhlambe ifola which category la? Ngoba ibisho umuntu othi wayekhona kwesini. Singayirigada as into evela kuma-news ngoba ivela kuphi leyo video. Ngiyabonga.
No, not unless it was initially posted online by a news organization, then it cannot be attributed to a media. Because go online, unfortunately, for example, one of the things that, besides the misinformation and disinformation, as I say, online, someone, would easily publish a picture of a rape victim, which is something that a newspaper editor or a broadcasting editor would never do. So that is why it is important to make the distinction. Online, someone would easily think that it is okay, maybe because someone is considered a celebrity and they are divorcing, that you can publish that if you've gotten wind of that information. But a credible news outlet would not do that, because you know the rules, the press code. So it is unfortunate. It is, as much as social media empowers people a lot, and but the downside to it is, I think, critically, that misinformation, the disinformation, and that anyone and everyone can just publish without a filter, without anything. But if you can make that distinction, then you will know, and I think that is where it also helps to know if you can trust that information. If you see that, does it come from a credible source, or is it just anyone? There are people, we call them content generators, and half of the time, if not most of the time, they take information from credible sources, and then they create their own accounts, and then they have large numbers. But often than not, how those large numbers are also accumulated is by publishing everything and anything, which credible news media outlets would not do. Yes.
You know, that's a very important point on the content generators and then the content moderators, because even those platforms, whether it's Twitter or TikTok, they themselves are products from different countries, and those countries have their own media laws. And then they are, and then globally, say for example now, as in South Africa, we have our own laws as well. But maybe I think if, in terms of the misinformation, we can regulate, and yet sometimes our regulations may not be known by those international operators. And somehow there must be a system in which, even from government to government, you know, complaints can be made when those sorts of misinformation are used on those platforms. But on the other hand, information now. Now, on the side of information, we are using those platforms, but they are platforms that are from international sources. And sometimes we ourselves we don't know that the different types of content we are generating about our own country, how that is compiled as data in another country or by some other players politically. Because I feel that a lot of unrest in governments, in especially developing countries, occurs because of this kind of use of social media. And even if a country complains to, say, Twitter or TikTok or whoever, they would say, but you know, we have no control of this. They don't have a control mechanism, and we should do this we should do the limitations in our country. So I think for us, even as legislators, we've got to continuously, monitor those things and regulate social media so that information is private. Our citizens' information is private and not misused elsewhere, as well as disinformation and the spreading of that in our country as well as outside about perceptions in South Africa can also be curtailed. But it is, that would be like an ongoing thing, but it's a matter of where we as legislators have a role to play, just from our own experiences of what happens on social media.
I think, yes, I think you'd have to strike a balance between obviously not regulating so that you curtail or disinformation, stroke misinformation, and censorship, because I think that there is also a fine line between the two. And of course, as someone who's on this other side, I would strongly also just caution this, but it is misinformation and disinformation is also a challenge for the media as well, and globally. It's a conversation that happens with the owners of these platforms, between them and media organizations at a global level, because it is a huge challenge. Kumet.
There was also a hand of Honorable Batata. You have already said that globally what is happening is a challenge on the side of these media platforms, vis-a-vis credible media platforms. Because we're in the workshop, we're allowed OPED if it comes, but maybe it will assist, maybe it will not. Makangile, just change yourself if you were the member of this legislature, because you are quite exposed on the side of the media. How can you advise us on this issue of misinformation and disinformation? Because sometimes, take for example, right now we are having issue of load shedding, and in other areas, water crisis and some sensitive issues. The way these platforms put it, it can turn the country into something, because sometimes abantu base Nanda are patient because they understand. My TV are talking about this, radio talking about this. Here comes a person in these platforms. He talks whatever he or she likes. And then you see people burning tires, doing everything. Burning a tire does not mean that we'll get electricity or water, but there are systems in place and everything. There are councillors, there's everyone. You know, there are sensitive issues where you see that in these media platforms, people tend to abuse it in a manner that it doesn't assist even himself or herself. Look at these things. Now, as a Shamteto, I don't know how far can we go, because not about ourselves, but for the country, because we love it. It really brings us back. Sometimes you open up your cell phone and say, oh, maybe what is this? And they do many things in the social media platforms. Now, on our side, without stopping anyone to do whatever that he or she likes, but what measures, if you can pass on that one, so that if we look at it as Shamteto, then we see without any limitations to say that you don't want people to use social media, whatever. But there must be a stop somewhere that this is not allowed. From other countries, as Mrs. Rajpansi was saying, that they are not from South Africa, but their policies.
I think what the response that I said earlier, that you can regulate, but there needs to be a fine line because there's a fine line between regulating and censoring. But when it comes to the value system, personally, I don't think that what happens on social media is outside what happens of our society. Rather, it is in fact a reflection of our society. So when you talk about values, I think that more than anything, it probably doesn't necessarily require the law. It just maybe needs an engagement with society, with organizations, whether it is traditional organizations, religious organizations, community organizations, civil society organizations, that just, the examples that I've given, and even I think schools as well, parental associations, because it's more than anything, it is just a reflection of who we have become as a society. But what the platforms do is they do just that they provide a platform for people to be able to see at a larger scale who we have become as a society. And I think are conversations that need to happen more than anything. I don't think there's a law. Of course, there's always room for improvement. There's always room. You should always, every now and then, introspect, review. But it's a reflection of who we've become. But also, when it comes to people using social media to vent their frustrations, it probably also the power that social media has created, where, you know, at the same time, collectively, we are also able to discuss this issue. Because I think what it does, more than anything, it also shows that the issues that we are faced with are more similar than different as a society. And perhaps if I were to bring it to a political system, regardless of which party you may be voting for, but if you are in KZN and you hear someone in the Free State is frustrated by potholes, which you are probably also frustrated by here, you know, you realize, I think more than anything, it's an opportunity to actually engage. And I go back to have a podcast, engage people on these platforms as well, about the issues. You identify. It is something that as the media we do as well, where we see what it is that people are talking about, but you then, before you write a story, you don't just rely on what people are saying on social media. You then follow the necessary processes to follow up on what, based on the conversation that is happening on social media, you think that the story is, and then you obviously also give the people concerned a chance to respond. But I think that as the legislature, you can also be proactive and look at some of the issues, and then maybe have a day where, you know, you have the different portfolio committees, maybe have a day for the settlements, human settlements portfolio committee, maybe have a day for the education portfolio committee, just to engage and say to people, you know, this is your day at such and such a time. We will be streaming live with the chairperson of the education portfolio committee and with whoever else, maybe the MEC as well, whoever, maybe the age, provincially it's HODs, right, not DGs. Maybe we'll have that HOD as well, and let people ask questions, but also go into that platform kind of anticipating, go into that platform prepared that someone is going to perhaps come to you. So go there with updated information to say, where are we? If when the MEC delivered a budget and said that by end of 2022-2023, we would have eradicated all the mud schools in the province. Go onto that platform knowing where you are, so that you are then proactive to say, we said that by 2023, we would have eradicated all the mud schools. There were 100 mud schools in the province. Either we have eradicated, or we have built maybe 80 of the 100. So our progress is 80%. Instead of you feeling that you are being ambushed when someone says, in my area, there has been a mud school for the past 5 years. What is the government doing about it? But if you go there prepared, you then know, if you give the information up front, and you can maybe even easily respond by asking, where do you live? And then they tell you, and then you're able to say, oh no, based on our report, we have just maybe approved that school is the next one, or whatever. But you know the issues that frustrate people. And unfortunately, I think to try and expect people not, when they have this huge platform, to vent about them, it's going to be difficult, because if anything, then it may also, and I don't think it is something that anyone wants from any of our political leaders. If you want to try and control what people discuss on these platforms, it will come across as censoring and it will come across as propaganda. And I think given our historical background and that we do pride ourselves to be a democracy, it is not the route we want to even try, and you do not even want to create that perception, real or not. And I think it's a value system where you need to engage churches, traditional community platforms, civil organizations, but also use the platforms as well as legislators. Use the platform. Sorry, can you please give her a chance and then we'll take your question because she asked before you.
Thanks, Chair. Owami mncane nje ubona lapha khona no Facebook. Ukuthola ukuthi Facebook uma ngabe unawo usuhackiwe. Ukuthi ke na ubona ngani ukuthi uhackiwe uFacebook wakho. Then mawusubonile ke bese ulungisa kanjani. Because sometimes angaze ngihackwe kodwa ngiyangizwa ukuthi abavama ukucela imali ukuthi ke na sengihluphekile kuwukuthi what do you do? One
of the easiest ways, I don't think there's anything that necessarily comes up on your account, but one of the easiest ways to notice that you have been hacked, and generally it will be the people that you engage with who will notice, is when really untoward behavior or untoward engagement happens. And as you say, if you know, and if, I don't know, I think tomorrow, if I were to wake up and my Facebook account has nudes of anyone, people that I engage with would immediately know that something is off here. And they would tell me, they would contact me on the side, people that, like her, we don't necessarily have a social media relationship, but we have a personal relationship, to say, I'll pay Facebook, what's going on? So often it is the people who alert you, or if you come across as well. But once you know, you can then report it to Facebook. And often the button to report anything is on the Facebook under settings, so you can then report the account, and then Facebook can remove the account. And of course, you can then, from your legitimate account, inform your friends that that was not you. Yes.
Yeah, I think that discussion about the censorship and all the regulation, that is important when we're doing regulations and all that. But the other mechanism may be for us to do more awareness, and like you said, rather be more prepared when it comes to tough issues and how to handle them. But also from our side as a legislature, I think for all the social media handles that we have, then we can use those also to promote, like what is like proper behavior on social media. What are the do's and what are the don'ts, so that because our social media platforms are being regularly looked at, so people will know that we shouldn't be using maybe unwarranted language. Even if we're very frustrated about a particular thing, we should have some decorum about the way we relate on these media. I think we can do that, and maybe somewhere along the line come up with our own code for social media as the legislature, just like we've come up with service delivery with Bartapele and all that. Maybe we can do that, and because that's what sticks in the minds of people. the 8 principles or 10 principles or this, that, or the other that as government we want to promote. But I want to come back to that idea of the podcast, which I think is a brilliant idea for the legislature. But apart from the podcast, which would highlight a variety of issues and help us with the work we're doing, but what about for us personally as MPs? What is your take on blogging? Because I feel blogging, and how that is set up is a very important thing. We can do it privately as an MP, but then we could start blogging on any pet issue. But if we do it as members of Parliament, sort of set up by Parliament to help us and promote us in the work that we do, it also may be a good way in which we can bring issues that are really burning issues in the community to Parliament, and how we discuss these, and how we promote our democracy. Your opinion on blogs.
I think that definitely you can use multimedia platforms. So it can be blogging as well for those who are keen to write. It can be a podcast. And for those who enjoy being behind the camera, or in front of the camera rather, it can also be a YouTube channel for the legislature, and you can use the different multimedia platforms that are available. You can live stream. You can, the key thing is just how you will build also a following, so that, because you also do not want to put content out there which people are not consuming, is to ensure that you schedule it so that people know that on such and such a date, if I'm interested in what is going on, say in social development, then I know that Thursday is the day when the legislature podcast is on social development, or if of course on special occasions as well, such as the opening of the legislature. Yes, you also do what you do, but to have scheduling so that people know what to expect, so that people can tune in when they when it is that particular topic. But as the legislature as well, what you can do, you spoke about social media etiquette, and especially when it comes to equipping young people, I think in society, it could also, if it doesn't happen on a smaller scale already, you could ensure that it is also included in the curriculum, because unfortunately sometimes it also happens because people are unaware, and you would know the inequalities in our country, because in certain schools, your former Model C schools and private schools, they do bring in experts. Generally, you find that when kids in the schools that I've mentioned, when they go to high school, they are expected to either have a tablet or an iPad. And what the schools typically do is, before kids start using those devices, they will bring in social media experts or legal experts who will run courses on social media etiquette. But they will also equip the parents with, for example, because parents, there are tools for parents to monitor. So as a parent, you need not even be at home. I could be here, and there are apps that I can use to control what my 17-year-old daughter. But this is information which is out there, which is available, which, of course, as a legislature, you have an obligation to then ensure that it reaches everyone. So, that is why I talk about revising or reviewing the curriculum so that this kind of courses are included. They could, I don't know, they could be part of LO, for example, as a subject. And those are other, because I think that will also talk to the values which Kumete spoke about. Because then when you know that if you post news and it probably, you may not think too much of it as a 16-year-old, but unfortunately as one aspiring Miss SA entrant discovered later when she had to even pull out of the pageant, as a 23-year-old, when you are trying to find a job, it may come back to haunt you, but you do that as a 16-year-old or as an 18-year-old out of ignorance more than anything. But unfortunately, human resources departments these days, they go to people's social media pages and the law allows it. And in fact, even people who offer scholarships and bursaries, especially international organizations, you could be on the verge of securing this amazing opportunity to go and study overseas, but they go through your social media pages and they find something which they feel that will harm their brand, and they unfortunately then do not allocate you the scholarship. So that is why I talk about including it in the curriculum so that it reaches everyone. Are there any other questions? Are there questions online or in the virtual platform? Sorry, yes.
Okay, thanks, Makayeta. This is my last question on this one. Thanks, I'm okay on the side of communities. Thanks for your input of potholes and other stuff. Although the very same communities don't come from Masakane campaigns and Izimbizo to echo their views, or because I swear local communities or councils try to teach them that if you say pothole, if you see that this is not working, this is the official, this is the number, and if they don't come. But and also they are very sharp. They do this in the eve of elections. You see many things coming up. They don't do it honestly. That's my worry. But we are in a democratic process, country. They must do it. I'm okay with that one. But I'm still worried about copycatting of our youth. But you have covered me by the issue of education and the kind of courses that the youngsters are given in school. Now it's a challenge to us as legislators that we must really do that, because I once heard someone saying that there are some apps, even if you are buying a cell phone for a child, that you can take them out or block them so that they cannot see some of those things. I was teasing by asking this question that what must I do, because it's painful. I don't think maybe 60% of the society knows about those things, and I should think on our side we must develop a program or whatever, where as women caucus we can champion that, because if a youngster sees usihlalo ebhema isigazu la efakwe la enza yonke into nathi sibona ukuthi ukhopisha into engazuthi correct ukwenzeka, that is my worry. Kanti I should think we must do something, because at the end of the day, if we want to leave behind a proper generation, we can't just say, let us do something so that we can change the environment at the end of the day. That's why I was teasing about this question as to how can we go, but now we've received many things. Thank you so much. As Mama, I should think there's more that we can do about what is happening in our country.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? No. Okay. I think we can move on to what is the last slide. Yes. I remember that someone asked in the morning about trending. And that's why I actually also titled this trending. So the do's and don'ts. You will not trend if you do not say no comment. I'm kidding. But among the do's and don'ts, and there was, I think it was MEC Mapena who actually asked earlier that what do you do when sometimes you cannot honestly comment because of where the matter is. You can indicate that, you know, you cannot comment because of where the matter is instead of just saying no comment. Because no comment, unfortunately, has over the decades been seen as shying away from answering questions and from being accountable. So, yeah, as best as possible, I would advise to avoid no comment. As best as possible, as best as possible.
What are you supposed to say if you really do not have the comment?
If it is not something that falls within your area, then perhaps you can then say that though it's rare that you will be asked about something that you are not expected to know of or to at least be aware of. And if you are still, say, investigating, then say that you are still investigating, if you know. But the no comment is actually tied to the next point, which is also, I've spoken about it a bit, to say anticipate, you know. And when I say I don't necessarily, yes, you, and I say again that I've never worked for government communications, so I don't know the processes and protocols. Maybe it happens, but from your side, anticipate, but also your comms team is supposed to anticipate what it is that people are interested in at that particular moment, or the audience that you are going to. Just like when, if you're going to address, say, business people, and they write a speech that is fitting to that audience, it is the same principle. That you anticipate that the media will be there. So because this is happening, or I mean, I'll make an example. Any ANC member at this stage, those, especially those who are in prominent positions right now, whether in the legislature or in provincial departments, or any ANC, especially those also who are considered to be senior members, if you're going to engage the media and the public in any capacity, until that elective conference happens in December, expect that question could come up. For example, it could be, it could be that you will be asked which slate, or it could be anything. It could be that someone has said that, you know, we are going to be putting up Umamzandile Gumede for SG at national level. I'm making an example. So, so, because here's the thing as well. The information comes from within, whether it is people who are testing the waters before they nominate you, or whether it is you sending your foot soldiers to test the waters. You know, it is a political environment. So and then when it starts going out there that, oh, there's a certain group that wants Mam Gumede to be the SG, and then the branches start getting excited, and then you start also, people capitalize on that. So between now and December, ANC members will be asked about the elective conference. And of course, you can say that you will not comment because the official nomination process has not started in the ANC, or, you know, that's one of the responses that we often get sometimes, or you will not comment outside ANC process, whatever the process, you know. But there are certain things which, as I say, the comms teams must help you to anticipate that you will be asked. I saw that, for example, I think there's a statement from the Zululand mayor which says that trucks must be banned. I think it was issued yesterday. I haven't read the full statement yet, so I don't know the contents beyond that. But I can tell you that if that statement indeed comes from the mayor's office, that the business community is not happy somewhere, and someone is going to ask about that. And so if the mayor of Zululand would, in fact, anyone from any other party could be asked, do you agree with the mayor of Zululand who says that trucks should be banned? And you probably say yes, and then there'll be a follow-up question that, so what do you say about, you know, the number of people who are employed by the logistics industry if you say that they should be banned, knowing the challenges that are there with transporting goods through rail because of the challenges that Transnet has? So you just need to, I cannot stress enough the importance of anticipating based on what is going on, based on, you know, what it is that people are talking about, and similarly with initiating as well. And I've given you examples of where you initiate to give people updates. I remember sometime last year, the National Planning Commission gave an update voluntarily to say that looking at the rate that things are going, those 2030 goals will not be met. And when you do that, it is received differently than when people say that, but what have you done? But when you initiate and you are forthcoming with information, and of course, what we've spoken about people have power, it is social media, people have power. And when previously you could perhaps rely on the fact that you will give your side of the story, and it will be published the next day by traditional media outlets. You know, today the news cycle is much quicker, but also, unfortunately, it is not only people who will endeavor to always give you a chance to give your side of the story, because anyone and everyone can publish. And my last point is, choose humanity over legalism. And I'm going to give a recent example. The families of the young people who died at a tavern in the Eastern Cape. You may say legally you are not supposed to give those families the autopsy reports, but you will trend if you do not anticipate that if you're going to choose in this instance requires humanity more than legalism, you will trend. And it is your comms team that must help you, and even your legal team must help you in this instance. There's just, with everything that happened, that has happened around, people have lost their children. They've been waiting to find out. And then you then say you are giving them an update, but then you're sort of giving them an update, a half update, and you know, there was just the way that was handled. There was no humanity. And unfortunately, it is not enough to just talk about, to say that this is what our lawyers advised in that instance. So And there are many other instances. I'm just making that one because it's a recent example, and where it is people expect the leaders that they elected, that they chose to just, I don't know, come across as to empathize with them and not throw the book at them. So, and yeah, but again, your comms teams should help you with these things. I'll take questions.
On the issue of no comment. Nakho kade se-legislation akhona ama-teams, ukhona nomuntu ofanele ukuthi acommente nankinto. Mina as an ordinary member, ngise-meetingini ethile kodwa ushilo ukuthi uzongi-interview. Now, if we are saying it's not good to say no comment, must I comment about something that I'm not supposed to be? And then after that, you get follow-up questions and questions, what's at home now, and that issue blow out of proportion. Protocol-wise, where does the member being put to? So I'm a little bit worried if no comment is not a good thing to be done. I understand I understand if we are interviewing the person who's relevant, but for us, I don't think it's okay to comment about my president or my premier or whoever without being summoned to do so. That's why I mean, as a personal, I always say, if you ask me questions after I've told you about what I'm about, simply I just say, I'm not going to be commenting on that one. There are people who are dealing with it.
And that's the answer, instead of just no comment. Ma'am, comment. Are there any other questions?
Thank you, Chair. I don't know whether I heard you well, saying you that you also sit on the SANEF. When you discuss these things, do a retro-inspect as a meeting. Do you at some point identify the fact that you are influencers? You are the influencers. Why I'm saying this, right now, we spoke about what our children look or peruse through the media and how they can be influenced. I'll give you one example. I don't have anything against any personal gender choices. I really don't care, because everybody has got his or her way of living. But to find that things that were supposed not to be fashionable, but because the media highlight on them, and then the other community members and children look up at that particular individual and say that, hey, I also want to be like Somizi, for instance. And then it doesn't become biological, it becomes fashionable. But my question is, when you discuss, do you sit and look at your strength being influencers and what you do about it? Thank you.
Yes, we do reflect and introspect. That is why, for example, last week, when some of our colleagues crossed the line at the Senzo Meyiwa case, we issued a statement and we condemned that. And we are going to also arranging a refresher course for those who may need it on court reporting. But we also published the guideline for court reporting for those who may need to just refer to it again. So, and yes, we know that we do set the agenda, or we are influential, as you prefer. But what also happens is that we also reflect what is happening in society. And I think that even if you look at the platforms that are now available, even if as traditional news media organizations we did not publish certain things, they would still be accessible to the public and they would still be just as popular because of social media, because of the internet. But we are a reflection as well. We do reflect what happens in society, and we have to reflect what happens in society, and then people make their choices about what to do with that information. But I think that even if we didn't do or we didn't report on certain issues, and there are many other things that we do not report on, but they are still issues that are quite topical in society. But I think if we're to also stick with the example that Omar made, to go back to the I think it was the second slide, to say what is journalism and why does journalism exist? And part of it is to educate, and part of that educating means that we have a responsibility, precisely because of that influence, the reach and the power that we have as the media, to ensure that a platform is created so that society can have those difficult conversations, so that society can be educated, so that society can learn to be tolerant, so that we can understand that we have different religious backgrounds, we have different cultural backgrounds, and yes, even when it comes to sexual orientation, that we have different preferences, and to educate about the importance of the tolerance around that, precisely because of our reach and our power. And it would be abdicating our responsibility as the media if we shied away from discussing the difficult conversations, or creating a platform for society to engage with the difficult conversations.
Lastly, the lady spoke about an app that can be that can be used to block kids from seeing other things in the. But I've been waiting for the name of the app, because all apps have got names, so that at least we, being the first block on the on this workshop, should know, and then we go out and disseminate that information, because we deal mostly with the public. But even we sitting here, we don't know the name of the app. So ungakanani ke umama nje oyikhelela amanzi le la ngazikhona uyoyithola nini? Emkhosini womhlanga, those who were there, emkhosini womhlanga, His Majesty mentioned something about the app. He gave it the name. I think it was Iris. So at least now Whenever we know there is iris, we have to look for it. And we have to disinfect that, to disseminate that information. We need the name of the app so that we can.
Mrs. Kanyile, do you know about that app?
There are quite a few of them. There's one which is owned by Google. I don't have the names here. What I think can do is can send the names through Ulinda, and then she can then forward them to the ladies that we've been liaising with. There are quite a few apps that are available. So I will send them to Ulinda, and then Ulinda can then forward them. And then you can be updated. But there are quite a few of them. Are there any other questions?
So, Mrs. Kanyile, what happens when you are a member of the legislature? You are called by one of the media or stations, or I mean your KwaZulu or SABC or whatever. They want to interview you, and then you actually grant them a time and date to interview you. They interview you, and then they ask questions, and then you reply. And then apparently they do not put that thing. They do not report about it. When you were interviewed, it's not covered in the media.
It would vary from organization to organization, but it also depends on how the interview came about, who had authorized it, what was the purpose of the interview. But not every story that journalists go to or write is published. Sometimes something else overtakes because as I mentioned earlier, sometimes it is an issue of space. And sometimes, you know, when the story is written, it's just perhaps not strong enough, or there are various reasons. But not every story is necessarily published, even after the interview is done. But you are allowed to follow up and just establish why it wasn't published, because it would vary from media house to media house.
Through you, Shal. I just now spoke about the media being a very strong influencer. Perhaps we won't be